Or the conventional economists say lending is between a saver and a borrower. We all know people who are savers, we all know people who are borrowers, and we immediately use that analogy, and that's how we interpret what they talk about banks. The same thing happens when you talk about a surplus. We think, oh, if we want to save money, you know, we have income coming in, expenditure going out, we want a gap between the two, and that gap is savings, and the bigger that gap is, the better we are for the future, so the government should do the same thing. That's the sort of analogy we have. In fact, when you look in the aggregate, it's impossible for us in the aggregate to save more money unless the banks create more debt or the government runs a deficit. Because if you want to save money, what it means is you're going to spend less, okay? And therefore you're going to buy less cups of coffee. So the coffee shop you buy coffee from is going to have less turnover for coffee. So your increase in your bank balance will be matched by a fall in theirs, and in particular, a fall in the turnover they get. So the incomes in the entire society come back to being lower than they were beforehand. And it's simply because when we talk about saving, we're talking about saving money. Okay. Now there's a set stock of money. If it doesn't change, let's take that as a mental starting point. Let's say there's a £1 trillion of money in the UK economy. Then in the aggregate, the economy can't save and get to 1.1 trillion. Okay, it's got to create it somehow. Now, the two ways you can create it is that banks can offer more loans than they get back in repayments, so they create more debt, and by creating more debt, they create more money. Or the government can run a deficit. Okay, if the government spends more than it takes back in taxation, it injects money into the economy as well. So the proper analogy to think about the government is that it's not like a household, which is where this whole saving myth comes from. It's like a bank, but a bank's money creation is by having a difference between new loans and repayment of old loans. And the government's creation of money is by having a difference between taxation and spending, where by spending more than it taxes, it actually creates money and injects it into the economy. Now, the other real dilemma I see in people thinking about this is that they've always got examples, and I've got plenty, of government wasting money by dreadful ideas, bad policies, all this sort of stuff. That's partly by the by, because we've also seen, banks create monstrosities in the housing sector, okay? So they both make mistakes. And really the thing is, well, let's try to get them both to do better. So we have banks, let's have banks funding investment and entrepreneurs rather than property speculators. And let's have government funding educators rather than bureaucrats, that sort of thing. But they both have to create money for the amount of money in the economy to grow so that you and I can actually save more in the aggregate.